Hey guys, in this video we're going to be covering Target 3D.2. Our master learning objective is I can solve systems of linear quadratic equations by factoring, completing the square, or using the quadratic formula. So the first thing is we have to solve with substitution, and then once we get things over on one side equal to 0, we can decide if we want to factor, complete the square, or use the quadratic formula. You can use whichever method at any time. It does not matter. So the first thing is set the equations equal to each other. So that's what substitution means. Since both of these equal y, we're just going to set each of them equal to each other. So x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals negative x plus 5. So let's first step, set it equal to each other. Second step is move everything to one side so the equation is equal to 0. Alright, so I'm going to stack up my like terms, get everything over to the left side by doing the opposite operation. And I'm going to stack that underneath its like term. So that plus 5 at the end, instead of adding 5, I do the inverse, the opposite, which is going to be subtract 5. Alright, that's going to give me x squared, negative 6x plus x is a negative 5x. 9 minus 5 is a positive 4, all equal to 0. So that was step 2. And step 3. Right, we combined our like terms. Step 4, use the quadratic equation. So, or we can factor, right? This could be factor, or we could use complete the square. Complete the square. Whichever one you think is easiest. Obviously, the quadratic formula can be used all the time, especially if you guys don't remember factoring. But the first thing would be is look at the couple terms. Can I multiply to 4, positive 4, right? Can I think of a number that multiplies to 4 and adds to a negative 5? Negative 5, add to a negative 5. Well, opposite signs means that I would have two negatives. So if I multiply negative 4 times a negative 1, that multiplies to a 4, which is what I need. And if I have negative 4x minus 1x, that would be my negative 5x. So I can actually just factor this using my Punnett square boxes. Right, my x squared term goes here, my negative 4x, my negative 1x, this would be x and x minus 4 minus 1, which would change us to a positive 4, right? These two terms, x minus 4 times x minus 1, still all equals to 0. I want to figure out what each value is. So when I set each of these equal to 0, I'm going to have x equals a positive 4 and x equals a positive 1. So that only gives us our x's. We have to go back and substitute these into one of the original equations. So what that means is I'm going to take this 4 and I'm going to substitute it into that first equation right here for wherever I have x. Alright, so I'm going to draw a line here. And it's going to be y equals negative 4 plus 5. Again, I'm just substituting it into the original equation. So this is going to be negative 4 plus 5, which is a negative 1. Right? Negative 4 plus 5, positive 1. And so that's my y value. So one of my equations is going to be 4, comma 1. X equals 5. Good. And my other equation is going to be taking that x and also substituting it into whatever equation I want. So that's going to be y is going to equal opposite of x plus 5. So it's negative 1 plus 5, which would be 4. So that solution is going to be 1, comma 4. Alright, so that's my final answer. These are our two intersection points. 4, 1, and 1, 4. Alright, so let's keep practicing some of these, and maybe we'll get to using a different method other than factoring. But again, if you want to use the quadratic formula, you could have also used the quadratic formula. The first couple steps are all the same. Right? So the first step here for number 2 is set them equal to each other. So x squared plus 11x minus 12 equals 12x plus 30. We want to combine like terms, so we have to move some things over. So I'm going to subtract 12x, stack that under its like term, subtract 30, stack that under its like terms. I'm going to have x squared. Positive 11x minus 12x is a negative 1x. Negative 12 and a negative 30 is a negative 42. Equals 0 now. We could factor this again. So thinking of numbers that multiply to 42, add to 1, I would always go to factoring because it's one of the easiest and fastest steps. But again, if you want to use the quadratic formula, pause the example, try the quadratic formula because we'll get the same answer at the end. Don't forget to substitute whatever you get for x back into the equation so you actually figure out what y is. Alright, so let's go ahead and see if we can think of a number that we multiply to get negative 42. And we want to add up to a 1. So negative 42 can be broken down to be, let's see, 6 and 7. But I need to add to a negative 1. So what that means is that I need the bigger number to be negative. So that's how I know my 7 is going to be negative and my 6 is going to be a positive. So this is going to be a positive 6x. This is going to be a negative 7x. This is going to be my x squared. So it's going to be x plus 6 and x minus 7. So my binomials are going to come x plus 6, x minus 7 equals to 0. When I solve for each of these, x equals a negative 6, x equals a positive 7. But I'm not done because I have to go back and substitute into one of the equations. Does not matter which one. So I'm going to take this x value and I'm going to substitute it in here for x. So it's going to give me y equals 12 times a negative 6 plus 30. 12 times a negative 6 is a negative 72 plus 30. Negative 72 plus 30 is a negative 42. So that's one of my solutions. Negative 6 for x, and I get a negative 42 for y. Still have to go ahead and substitute that 7. Again, for wherever I have one of the x's, I'm going to use that same equation. And I get y is going to equal 12 times 7 plus 30. 12 times 7. My 12 times 7 is 84. Plus 30. It's going to give me a 114. So x was 7, y was 114. This system has two solutions. Right? Two solutions. And these are my solutions. So our last example here, y equals x squared minus 2x minus 6, and y equals 4x plus 10. So start off the same as all those other problems, right? Set those equations equal to each other. So x squared minus 2x minus 6 equals 4x plus 10. We want to get everything over to the same side, so we're going to do the inverse operation and combine like terms. So to move over a positive 4x, the opposite is subtract 4x over to the other side. And then we have a plus 10. The opposite of adding 10 is subtracting 10. Again, stacking those under its like terms. And now we can go ahead and combine our like terms. So x squared just gets brought down. There's no other x squared. Negative 2x minus 4x is a negative 6x. Negative 6 and a negative 10 is a negative 16 equals to 0. So now we're looking for a number that multiplies to negative 16, adds to 6, and if we check our multiplication chart first, we see that we can use a negative 8 and a positive 2. So our point square box here is going to look like a negative 8x and a positive 2x. Right, that's going to add up to my negative 16 as well as multiplying to the, add up to negative 6, multiply to negative 16. So x squared, this is going to be x minus 8 and x plus 2. Again, if you do not like factoring, please just use the quadratic formula, right? You have your a, you have your b, and you have your c. Use the quadratic formula. If you like factoring, factor it. You can choose however you want to solve these problems. So this is going to become x minus 8 and x plus 2 equals to 0. Solving for each of these x values, x is going to equal positive 8 and x is going to equal negative 2. We have to go back and we have to substitute these two x values individually into one of the equations. I always pick the easier one, but you are able to pick whichever equation you want to plug it into. So this is going to be y equals 4 times that x, which is now 8, plus 10. 4 times 8 is 32, plus 10 is going to equal 42. So this is what y is. So one of my solutions is going to be at 8, 42. And then the other equation, to figure out my y, I'm going to use the same one. So 4 times negative 2 plus 10. 4 times negative 2 is a negative 8 plus 10. This is going to be a positive 2. So therefore, my ordered pair is at negative 2, 2. Those are my two solutions of where these two graphs intersect. Now, if you wanted to see any of these done, for example, I'm going to do this last equation. So this one that we just simplified. Obviously, you have to get things on one side first. So I'm actually going to look at this equation, the x squared minus 6x minus 16 equals 0, and I'm going to do solving by the quadratic formula. If you are okay with factoring and you understand how that you have the option to factor or to use the quadratic formula, right? It says it right here. You can do by factoring, completing the square, or by using the quadratic formula. All of these options work. I'm just going to show you one page. On the next page, how to do this last question using the quadratic formula, or just kind of like getting you started. But again, if you're ready to go, just go ahead and click pause and then work on activity 3C or 3D.2. Okay? So let me pull up another page. So looking again at that last example, number 3, that was my equation, right? X squared minus 6x minus 16. I can easily state my A, B, and C, right? A is 1, B is negative 6, and C is negative 16. I can then use the quadratic equation and solve using the quadratic equation if I don't know how to solve by factoring, right? If you didn't like factoring, you can solve it this way. So, quadratic formula says opposite of B plus or minus B squared minus 4AC. Again, please stop watching the video if you know how to factor. This is just in case for those that want to do completing the square. 2 times 1. Alright, this is going to be my negative times a negative. It's going to give me a positive 6 plus or minus square root. When I plug that all into my radical, underneath the radical, use my calculator here. Right, parentheses, negative 6 quantity squared minus 4 times A times C. Enter. That's going to give me 100. All over 2 is going to be 6 plus or minus. Square root of 100 is 10 over 2. This is going to split up into my two answers, right? I have 6 plus 10 over 2. So 6 plus 10 is 16 over 2, which is 8. And this is going to be 6 minus 10 over 2. It's going to be a negative 4 over 2, which is going to be negative 2. Right, that's exactly what our two x values were in our original, but that doesn't give us the final answer. We would still have to go back and substitute that in to figure out what our y values are. So looking at one of those equations again, y equals 4x plus 10. I'm going to go ahead and take those two x values, right? X equals 8, and x also equals -2. So I'm going to take those two options and plug it in here where I have my x. So y is going to be 4 times 8 plus 10, right? Same steps as before. This is equal 42. So one of my equations then is going to be 8 comma 42. If I were to solve for the other equation, y equals 4x plus 10 again. But now I'm going to substitute my other equations, right? My x equals -2. So 4 times -2 plus 10, which is -8 plus 10. Which equals a positive 2. So this is going to be -2 comma positive 2. So notice these two solutions, right? These two solutions were the solutions we had right here, right? Same two solutions. So if you don't like factoring, you forget how to do it, use the quadratic formula. That brings us to the end of this video. Go ahead and work on target 3D.2. Good luck.